Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you're well. It is Rabbi Akiva Males, and today is Wednesday. It is March the 23rd, and we're getting ready for Parshas Shemini. I hope everyone had a wonderful Purim, and we're now moving off of Purim. We're next Yom Tov on our calendar is going to be Pesach, and we're going to focus on the Parshas HaShavua this week, which is Parshas Shemini. I want to share with you some items in the Parsha this week that I hope you'll find very fascinating. Some of this may be completely new. So let's take a look. The Parsha begins, it's talking about the inauguration of the Mishkan. The Klal Yisrael had worked for months on coming up with all the materials and the supplies to build the Mishkan. This would be the ultimate symbol we spoke about the other week, the Mishkan HaEdus. It would give testimony that Hashem had forgiven us for the sin of the golden calf. Why? Because when we would see God's presence residing amongst us, that would make it abundantly clear that God is still with us, and that's evidence that He's forgiven us. So let's see. This parsha is going to deal with what actually happened at the inauguration of the Mishkan. It says, "Vayibiyom Shmini," was on the 8th day of the inaugural ceremonies. Kara Moshe Aaron Levanov Ziknei Yisrael. So Moshe summons, he calls out to Aaron and his sons and all the Ziknei, the elders of Bnei Israel. Vayomer al Aaron, and he says to Aaron, Kach lecha egel ben bakar. You need to take for yourself, we're going to take a specific korban at this point. It's got to be an egel. An egel is a calf, but it's got a male calf. Egel ben bakar. So you translate there as a bull calf. So it's a male calf. That's the child of a bakar, of an ox. So that is going to be this egel is going to be a chatas, a sin offering, and an ayil will be a ram. That'll be an ola tamimim. It'll be an ola. That'll be a completely burnt offering. Both of those have to be tamim. That both got to be unblemished. And you're going to bring them before Hashem. So it's very clear here that there's a chatas that needs to be brought. There's a sin offering that's got to be brought. And specifically, it's got to be an egel. It has to be a calf. What is the significance of this? So let's see Rashi. Rashi's quoting the Medrash. And Rashi says, what's the significance of Aharon bringing an egel, bringing a calf right now at the inauguration of the Mishkan? So Rashi says, Lodia, by bringing this calf, this was to inform Aaron and make it clear to Bnei Israel, Shemechaper lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu al yidei egel zeh al ma'aseh ha'egel she'asa. By bringing this egel, which was a calf, so this will serve to let Aaron and all of Klal Yisrael really know that Hashem is in the process, He is forgiving them for what happened with another egel, with the golden calf, the egel azav, that terrible avera that had occurred right after the giving of the luchos. So this is going to show that a proper teshuvah has been done, and by bringing this egel, this will serve as a kapara. This will serve as an atonement for the final atonement, I should say, for the cheda egel, for the sin of the golden calf. So it's no accident that the animal that's going to be brought as a chatas, as a sin offering right now at the inauguration of the Mishkan, is going to be an egel, is going to be a calf to serve in the capacity of atoning for the sin of the cheda egel, the golden calf. All right, so let's see. That's what Rashi says, quoting the Medrash Tanchuma. There's a very long piece in the Mizrahi. Mizrahi is Rav Eliyahu Mizrahi, who wrote a super commentary to Rashi. Very long piece here. And I want to share with you one paragraph within that piece that he really raises a fundamental question. And I think it'll be a question if we would discuss this Rashi and the Medrash that Rashi's quoting, I think all of us would come up with this question because he's going to raise an issue that needs to be addressed. But let's see. So V'im Tomar, if you would raise the question, Eich yichapera egel al ma'aseh egel. How can Aaron be told, bring an egel, bring a calf to atone for the sin of the golden calf? We have a principle, and it shows up in many places. It shows up in the Gemara often. Ein kategor nasa senegar. The prosecutor cannot become the defender, meaning the item through which sin was brought about can't now become my advocate. The prosecutor cannot become my defender, cannot become my advocate. So what's the ultimate prosecutor? Is an egel, is the calf, because just seeing the calf is reminiscent of that terrible crime, that terrible sin of the egel azav. So how, if the last thing we want to ever do, and we'll see how this concept comes up, want to remind HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We never want to remind Hashem of the Chet HaEgel. We don't want to remind Hashem that there was once the sin of the golden calf. That's something we want to kind of just brush away and not dredge up any memory of that. So you want to tell Aaron to bring in a korban, fine, but don't bring an egel, don't bring a calf. A calf's going to bring up the memory. Why even jog Hashem's memory? That's the concept of ein kateger nasa seneger, something which once served as a prosecutor can't now serve as an advocate, as a defender. So let's see what happens here. It says, what do you do with the principle of ein kateger nasa seneger? So the Mizrahi continues, kiritnan. I'll show you where else this concept comes up. It's in a Mishnah, it's in Rosh Hashanah, but Perek Ra'u based in. It says, kol shofros, any shofar from any kosher animal, ksherin. On Rosh Hashanah, you could use a shofar from any kosher animal, chutz mishal para. The one that cannot be used is from a cow. What's the reason? V'amar ula hainu taima. What's the reason? Kid Rav Chisda, Damar Rav Chisda, mipnei mayin kohen gadol nichnas bebigdei zav. It's because of the same concept. Why does the kohen gadol not go into the inner sanctum in the Beis Hamikdash on Yom Kippur wearing golden vestments? It does not do that. When the kohen gadol goes into the innermost recesses of the Beis Hamikdash to bring the ketores and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, not allowed to wear gold. Why not? Because again, there's this concept of ein kategor nasa seneger, that our prosecutor, that which got us in trouble, can't become our advocate, cannot become our defense attorney. So gold played such a role in one of the most colossal sins that Bnei Yisrael has ever fallen into, and that was the gold of the golden calf. Therefore, the last thing we want to do on Yom Kippur is send the Kohen Gadol into the Kodesh HaKadoshim wearing gold to remind Hashem of that sin of the golden calf. We don't want to do anything that's going to dredge that up, that's going to jog that memory. That's the concept, ein kategor nasa seneger. So again, what happened? The Mishnah told us in Rosh Hashanah that you can use the shofar from any kosher animal on Rosh Hashanah, just not from a cow. Why? So he says, because it's the same concept why the Kohen Gadol doesn't wear gold. We don't want the Kohen Gadol to wear gold on Yom Kippur when he goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, because that's going to dredge up the memory of the Chet HaEgel, that concept in kategor nasa seneger. So that also explains why we don't use the shofar of a cow on Rosh Hashanah. Hachanami, that's the same reason why we don't use the shofar of a cow on Rosh Hashanah, in kategor nasa seneger. We don't want to do anything that'll invoke the memory of the Chet HaEgel. Perish Rashi explains there, Zahav Egel, the shofar shopara. It's the same idea that the Kohen Gadol doesn't want to wear gold because that'll dredge up the memory of the egel. And the same thing, the shofar shopara. To use a shofar come from a cow, that's going to dredge up the memory of the egel azav, kategor the egelo. All of those represent the prosecution. That'll dredge up the terrible memories of the egel. So the Mizrahi is asking the following question on Rashi. We know such a principle of ein kategor nasa seneger. That's why we don't use a shofar of a cow on Rosh Hashanah. That's why on Yom Kippur the Kohen Gadol doesn't wear gold when he goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. If that's the case, we don't want to dredge up the memory of the Egel Azav. Why now in Parshas Shemini is Moshe telling Aaron that it's your job to bring a korban chatas and it's got to be an egel, it's got to be a calf? Why are you doing that? You're going to dredge up the memory of the Egel Azav. Don't do that. That's dangerous. That's the question on Rashi. Let's see how he answers it. Yesh Lomar, here's the answer. Delo amrin anein kategor nasa seneger. When do we say that concept? That you don't want to jog the memory, you don't want to bring up the memory of the egel? That's ela ba'osan sheva dosan b'fnim. That's only in an element of the service in the Beis Hamikdash or Beis Mishkan that goes on in the Kodesh HaKadoshim b'fnim, in the innermost sanctum. That's where it's dangerous. The Kohen Gadol could wear gold on Yom Kippur, just not at that one part of the service when he goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But where the avodah is taking place outside, meaning out in the courtyard, and even in the Kodesh section, The Kohen does wear gold out there. So it's not that the Kohen's never allowed to wear gold. It's just there's one spot when you're going into the Kodesh HaKodashim, you're standing right before the holiest place by the Aron, that's so to say where the Shechina is most felt. That's where you don't drudge up the memory. But elsewhere, there's nothing wrong with a Kohen wearing gold. So he's going to say the same idea. Could go in parachatas. Look, there's a cow that's brought as a chatas, the egel chatas, and there's also an egel calf that's brought as a chatas. Every moed, every Yom Tov, we bring a par, we bring a cow to serve as a korban musaf, and also on Rosh Chodesh. Why is that all okay? Because that's not taking place in the Kodesh HaKodashim. It's taking place on the outer mizbeach. Lo kamrinan. So when things are going on outside of the Kodesh HaKodashim, we do not invoke the principle of ein kategor nasis and egor. So that's why it was not a problem for the Kohen Gadol to wear gold anywhere else. It was just one spot. He couldn't wear it when he went Kodesh HaKodashim. So Mizrahi is answering. So that also explains why it's not a problem for Aaron now to be bringing an egel as a chatas. Yes, there's important symbolism there that the egel has to be mechaper, this egel, this calf that's being brought as a chatas, as a sin offering, has to atone for the cheda egel. But we're not nervous about invoking the memory of the egel because he's not going lifnai lifnim. He's not going into the inner sanctum of the Beis Hamikdash. It's only dangerous to do so, to bring up that memory when you're going into the Kodesh HaKodashim. But if you're not going in lifnei melech melchei amlachim, before the King of Kings in the Kodesh HaKodashim, then it's not dangerous to bring up something which might hint to the egel. That's what he's answering. And then he says, the Gemara part, because look, the Gemara even raises a question. The Gemara even says, so then why is it okay for the Kohen Gadol to wear gold outside? Mishani, it answers, the only time there's a danger of about dredging up the memory of the Cheda Egel, that's only when you're in the Kodesh HaKodashim. But anything outside, there's no such fear. And then he says, Vadar Parach, and then the Gemara asks, if that's the case, then what's the problem? Very logical question. Then what's the problem using a shofar from a par? Why can't I use the shofar of a cow? That shofar is not being blown in the Kodesh HaKodashim. So he says, Vadar Parach, therefore the Gemara follows up by saying, Yachi shofar nami b'chutzu. The shofar is blown outside. It's not in the Kodesh HaKodashim. Umeshani, the Gemara, Kivan de lazikaron kasi kilafnim dami. The whole purpose of the shofar is to jog Hashem's memory, right? It's the zichronos is going on. So the whole purpose of the shofar is to jog Hashem's memory. So even though it's not taking place in the Kodesh HaKodashim, since it's serving that purpose of jogging the memory, the last thing we want to do is use the shofar of a par because that could bring up the memory of the egel. So this is a beautiful Mizrahi. It's just important to know is that he's putting parameters on this rule of ein kategor nasis senegar, is that it's not a problem for the Kohen Gadol to wear gold on Yom Kippur. There's just one spot where he can't wear it, and that's in the Kodesh HaKodashim. I'll tell you where else this comes up. There is there are so many minhagim that are involved on Yom Kippur, and one minhag that is out there on Yom Kippur you'll find some people have is that they'll refrain from wearing gold. And why will they refrain from wearing gold? They'll point a finger. The Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur didn't wear gold. But it's true, the Kohen Gadol didn't wear gold when he went into the Kodesh HaKodashim, when he went lifnai lifnim, when he went into the inner sanctum of the Beis Hamikdash. But the Gemara clearly tells us, outside of there was no problem for the Kohen Gadol to wear gold on Yom Kippur. It was just one spot in the Kodesh HaKodashim. So if, let's say, someone wants to wear their watch, their jewelry, whatever they have on Yom Kippur, that's not a problem. There's a different concept of not getting all bedecked on Yom Kippur because it is a day of judgment, and we are somewhat shaking that this is, we feel how much is on the line, so someone doesn't want to overdo it and get too fixated with jewelry. But that's not the reason not to wear gold on Yom Kippur. By that same token, we would say to someone, don't wear an incredible amount of silver because that's just not appropriate for the day. But don't go out of control. So that's the same idea. But in other words, let's say I have a gold pair of of cufflinks. I have a watch. There's no problem wearing that on Yom Kippur. I'm not the Kohen Gadol going lifnai lifnim. I'm not going into the inner sanctum. But anyhow, I think this is a very, very important piece here, because again, we do hear this concept come up all the time of ein kategor nasa negar, that we don't want to have our prosecutor, the ultimate prosecutor of Bnei Yisrael has, is the cheda ego, because that's always being dredged up to points to our failing. The last thing we want to do is invoke that memory at a time where it could damage us. But this gives some parameters to that. But what I love about this Rashi, and this is going to follow through into the next item that we're going to see, is that what this Rashi does is it tells us that there was something very important going on when the Mishkan was being dedicated, is that we were atoning for national sins. And this one shows us about the Egel Hazav, that Aaron was tasked to bring an Egel as a chatas, specifically to atone for the sin of the golden calf. But we're going to see now an incredible commentary that says there was more going on as well. During this auspicious time of when the Mishkan was being dedicated, there was more kapara taking place. Let's go a little further. So the next pasuk says, "Vel b'nei Yisrael tadaber lemor." Now that's what we just read. What was the instructions to Aharon and his sons? What did they need to bring in terms of their personal karbanos at the dedication of the Mishkan? Now we're going to talk about b'nei Yisrael, the Jewish people as a community. Now, Bnei Yisrael to daber more, and here's what you need to tell the Jews: Kichu seir izim lechatas. You also need to bring a chatas, a sin offering, but it's not an egel, it's not a calf. You need to bring a seir izim. A seir izim means a goat. It's a male goat. The egel keves b'nei shana t'mimim lola, and you also got to bring a calf and a lamb as an ola. But what does Bnei Yisrael have to bring as a chatas? Bnei Yisrael had to bring a communal offering of a seir izim, a he goat. Where is what's that symbolizing? So let's see. Rav Zalman Sorotzkin, we haven't quoted him in a bit. So Rav Zalman Sorotzkin in his Aznayim LaTorah, look what he writes. Beautiful idea. Seir izim chatas, that Bnei Yisrael had to bring a communal chatas of a seir izim, a he goat, a male goat, at the dedication of the Mishkan. What's the symbolism? He says, "Lechaper al mechiras Yosef." That was to atone. We as a community needed to atone for mechiras Yosef, for the sale of Yosef Atzarek. What does a goat have to do with Yosef? Sheshachatu az sirizim. When Bnei Yisrael, when the brothers wanted to mask what they had done to Yosef, it says that they took off his coat, his ksonas apasim, and what did they do with that coat? They dipped it in blood. And what type of blood specifically was blood of a goat? So he says, Lama niskar ata avon zeh. So he's quoting, that's the Torah's Kohanim. That's the Medrash. The Medrash says the reason why Bnei Yisrael needed to bring as a chatas, a goat, was to atone for the sin of Mechiras Yosef. So again, look what's going on at the dedication Mishkan. There's a lot of atonement going on. Aaron is bringing a chatas to atone for the Egel Azav. Bnei Yisrael is bringing a communal chatas to atone for Mechiras Yosef, the sale of Joseph. So now Rav Sorotzkin says, Lama nizkar ata avon zeh lo shas v'tzias Mitzrayim. Why right now is God saying, look, it's on my mind. It's important right now that we do something as a community to atone for the sin of selling Yosef. Why right now? Why didn't we do something at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, at the time the Jews left Egypt a little earlier? Shagalu l'sham al yedei mechiras Yosef la'eved. The whole reason why we were enslaved in Egypt, what brought us down there to start with, was the fact that we had sold Yosef there as an eved, as a slave, and that's how everything played itself out from there. Why didn't Hashem say, before I'm going to take you out of slavery, you got to bring a korban Pesach, but you also got to bring a korban to be mechaper, to atone for what you did for Yosef. It would have been appropriate then. Bring a korban Pesach and also bring a korban chatas. That's his question. Why didn't we do it then? Let Hashem say, before you got yourself into this mess because of Mechiras Yosef, before you could leave, now you got to atone for it, and then I'll take you out. Why didn't Hashem say that? It says, V'yesh Shlomer, he's going to give two answers. V'yesh Shlomer, she'en chatas babama, because first of all, a chatas is a sin offering that can't be brought on a private altar. That has to be brought in either a Mishkan or the Beis HaMikdash on a Mizbeach. So until this point in our history, we didn't have a Mizbeach. You're right. Logically, it sounds nice. It would have made a lot of sense to have had a korban chatas in Mitzrayim before we left Egypt, but it couldn't be done. It doesn't work. It's just not in the ingredients, because a chatas has to be brought on a mizbeach. We didn't have a mizbeach until the Mishkan was built. That's his first answer. That's why this korban could not be brought until the Mishkan was established. That's his first answer. Let's see his second answer. Odie Shlomar, second answer. One of the fundamental principles or goals of the Mishkan, and the Beis HaMikdash, and the concept of that pilgrimage that would go on 3 times a year to the Beis HaMikdash, and the whole concept of why we were all camped out around the Mishkan in the wilderness, the whole point of so much of this was to unite Bnei Yisrael and create an incredible amount of camaraderie, and to heal us, to heal us from this natural inclination we have to quarrel with one another and to splinter. The sinas achim, and the fact that we have hatred sometimes towards our fellow family members of Bnei Yisrael. The spurus, and this idea that we have that we've got to all go our own way. Then he tells you where to look. He says in one of the other Sfarim he wrote, the Hesi al sinas achem, nisgalet slenu b'shas mechiras Yosef. The time when this was most prominent, the time that it was most prominent, to where it showed the most our hatred and the fact that we did not get along, was at the time of the sale of Yosef. The Ata, and now, Kasher Banu Bnei Yisrael Hamishkan, now that the Jewish people have built the Mishkan, and he says, and we have this idea that there is a beam within the Mishkan that's supposed to go from end to end, meaning the Mishkan is supposed to be this uniting factor that unites all of Bnei Israel. Right now, God is calling us. He says, I need you now. When you're dedicating the Mishkan, I need an incredible display of unity. Likud, and of everyone's got to come together to form a unit. Kol shiftei, all the tribes of Hashem, mina katzeh katzeh, from end to end. Ba'azman lehisvados al seirizim. Now is the most appropriate time to confess about the goat that was slaughtered when Yosef was sold. V'lashuv b'tshuva shlema al mechiras Yosef. Now is the time when it's most appropriate to make atonement for the sale of Yosef. So I think this is a beautiful answer. What Rav Sorotzkin is suggesting is as follows. The Medrash states that the reason why Bnei Yisrael had to bring the chatas, the sin offering of a goat, specifically at the inauguration of the Mishkan, so he gives one answer, is okay, you're right, it would have been nice to have done that in Egypt, but we didn't have a Mizbeach till then. So now's the first time we have Mizbeach, get it done. That's his first answer. But his second answer is no, it's more meaningful now. You're right, in Mitzrayim it may have been meaningful because that's how we got into Egypt, was because of the sale of Joseph. So we shouldn't get out until we atone for that. Yeah, okay, you're right, there's a lot of meaning. But it's even more meaningful now when we're dedicating the Mishkan, and we want to set the record straight that the Mishkan is all about uniting Bnei Yisrael. The Mishkan is all about bringing us together and saying we've got to get away from this idea of splintering. We've got to have more avas, we've got to have more senseless love, and we got to get away from sinas, we got to get away from senseless hatred. Now is the time, if we want to say this is what the Mishkan's all about, now is the time to bring up the memory of Mechiras Yosef and say, we're ending that. We're ending that. That something of that nature is never going to happen again. That's the time when it's most appropriate. I saw there was a hand up a second ago. I'm sorry, I missed that. There was a hand that was raised a second ago from someone. Okay, but you know what we'll do? We're going to make sure to end on time, and we'll open it up for all comments then at that point. I want to show you one more place where Sorotzkin brings this up, this idea that innate at the time that the Mishkan was being dedicated, it was so incumbent, it was so important to remember what had happened at Mechiras Yosef, and we needed to atone for it. There's one more spot I saw in the Parsha where he brings it up. A little bit later in the same parak, it's in Parak Tes, chapter 9. So it says as follows, Vayakreves Karban Ha'am, and he brought forward the people's sacrifice, Vayikach es seir achatas. And it's talking about Aaron. So Aaron was acting as the shaliach, as the agent for Bnei Yisrael. In other words, Bnei Yisrael was told to bring this communal, on behalf of all Bnei Yisrael, all the Jewish people, to bring this communal sin offering. But they couldn't all do this. They're not the ones appointed to. So they've designated this animal to be their communal offering, and now they're saying Aaron is going to be their agent. So the pasuk tells us, acting as their agent, vayakreves korbanam, that he brought forward the people's offering. Vayikach es seir achatas. He took that goat that was going to be a sin offering, asher la'am, that was belonged to the people. Vayishchateu, he slaughtered it. Vayichateu karishon, and he made it into a sin offering just like the first one. So again, Rav Sorotskin, he has a beautiful little piece here. Look what he says. Vayikach es seir achatas, vayishchateu. So he says, b'shum echad mea karbanos, by any of the other karbanos that are mentioned at the inauguration of the Mishkan, lo nemar vayikach. It does not, the Torah never uses that word vayikach. Ella, it just says vayishchat. He slaughtered it. So v'lama b'seir achatas asher la'am, why now, when it comes to this he-goat that was acting as a chatas, as a sin offering on behalf of all Bnei Yisrael, why specifically here, nemar gam vayikach, gam vayishchateu? Why doesn't it specifically say here that expression? He took it and he slaughtered it. By any of the other karbanos, rather, it just says vayishchat, that Aaron did it, and he slaughtered it. You never see this expression of vayikach. Why specifically here does the Torah throw this in? And look what he says. Because he quotes again that Torah Kohanim, the Medrash earlier, and it says the whole purpose of the chatas of Bnei Yisrael and the he-goat was to be an atonement for Mechiras Yosef, the sale of Joseph. Gam kicha, gam shchita. And if you look at the words in the psukim by the sale of Yosef, you'll find both terms come up, vayikach and vayishchat. It says vayikchu es ketonas Yosef. The brothers took the tunic of Yosef. Vayishchatu sirizim. And they slaughtered the goat. So again, both expressions, vayikach and vayishchat, are present when the mechira, the sin, the great crime of the sale of Yosef takes place. That's why it's crucial that both terms are present when the atonement's taking place. Bnei Israel sinned with vayikach, now the atonement's going to involve vayikach. They sinned with vayishchat, the atonement's going to involve vayishchat. I love that. It's beautiful. And then look what he says. He adds one more piece. It also says, what did they do after they had the blood from the goat by the sale of Joseph? They took that blood and they dipped his tunic, his ketones, into it. Lefikach, therefore, gam b'kapara, also here, when the atonement is taking place, hayukicha ushchita, therefore you find all those elements are present as well. There's vayikach, that Aaron has to take the animal, but that's to atone for vayikach, how they took his tunic. Shchita, he shechts the animal, that atones for that they shechted the goat. And finally, afilu tevila, there's even here clear description of a tevila, that's of a dipping taking place, where shetaval Aaron etzbo badam, Aaron had to dip his fingers into the blood, v'nasanal karnos mizbeach, to place them on the corners of the mizbeach. Sharei nemar, because the pasuk says vayichateu karishon, he made this communal sin offering into a karban chatas, just like the first one. Uvarishon, in the first one, meaning his, nemar vayitbo, the Torah clearly spelled out that he dipped his fingers into it. So therefore, the pasuk's telling us v'chateu karishon, that he shechted and he made it chatas exactly like the first one, means tvila, dipping was present here too. Because part of the chatas is you have to dip your finger into the blood and then put the blood on the corners of the mizbeach. So I thought this was just also so fascinating. He's saying within the words of the psukim, this, you see how important this is. This is such an important element in the dedication of the Mishkan. There's various atonements taking place. The first source we saw, Rashi, saying that Aharon's chatas was an atonement for the Cheda Ego. And now the communal chatas is an atonement for Mechiras Yosef, specifically now, because the whole purpose of the Mishkan is to unite us. So we said now, this is what we have to finally say, enough. There's not going to be any more divisiveness. There's going to be unity. There's going to be camaraderie. And we're going to end, we're putting to bed all the sins of Mechiras Yosef. That's why it's now. And look at all the elements that are present. there's vayikach, there's vayishchat, and there's vayitbol. Those three elements that played a role in the divisiveness, terrible divisiveness that took place at Mechiras Yosef, all three of those, there's acts of atonement taking place right here. I thought that was incredibly interesting. One more Dvar Torah I want to share with you. This is something fascinating. I was sharing this with my students in school the other week. It's that Shemini, towards the end of the Parsha, deals with the laws of kashrus. It tells us what are the signs of kosher animals. It tells us about the kosher birds, and it also tells us about the kosher fish. So the pasuk tells us, it's in Parak Yud Aleph, chapter 11, the Torah gives us the identity. How do I know if something's a kosher fish or not? If it has fins and it has scales, in any body of water, so if you want to know if a fish is kosher, there are two signs. It has to have scales, it has to have fins. Snapir are fins, kaskeses are scales. The Gemara in Chulin tells us that we have a tradition going back to Moshe that any fish that has scales, we know for a fact had fins. So if, let's say, you found a fillet and a fish, and you don't know, it's already been cut up, so you don't see any fins, but I see the scale, I see the skin on it, and the skin, it has scales, I can say for certain that's a kosher fish. The opposite is not true. Just because a fish has fins does not mean it has scales. Think of catfish. There's plenty of fish out there, all the non-kosher fish. Most of them have fins, they just don't have scales. But the opposite, if there's a fish that has scales, it always has fins. That's a tradition we have. So here's the Torah telling us, those are the two hallmarks you need for a kosher fish, have to have scales and fins. So a fascinating halacha question is emerging. I'm not aware of this hitting the market yet, but it should be soon if all goes as planned. So let's see, this was an article that first came to my attention a little more than 10 years ago. It's close to 12 at this point. Look at this. So this was in Time magazine. Faster growing salmon. Americans love heart-healthy salmon, but with wild populations dwindling, most of the salmon we now eat is farmed, not caught. The problem is that salmon makes bad farm animals. It takes 3 pounds of feed to grow 1 pound of salmon. Aqua Bounty solution: splice a gene from Chinook salmon with DNA from an eel-like creature called an ocean pout. Aqua Advantage Atlantic salmon can grow twice as fast, making them easier to farm. Environmentalists wary of the first edible genetically engineered animal aren't so sure, however, and have dubbed the creation Frankenfish. Government hearing on the salmon ended inconclusively, but barring any changes, the fish could be headed to market soon. So I saw this first reported in 2010. Let me just show you a picture, a graphic on the bottom of page 4. This is wild. So here it is, I found this online, how they compare. So the salmon in the back, it says GM, that's genetically modified salmon. That's the Aqua Bounty salmon. Look how much larger it is. Both of them are 18 months old, and the smaller salmon is just a regular salmon that Hashem created. So a regular farmed salmon. So both of them at 18 months old, look at the difference between them. The genetically modified salmon is already 24 inches long, as opposed to the farmed salmon, 13. So it's almost double the size. And look at the weight. It's more than double the weight. 6.6 pounds of meat on that salmon, and the regular salmon's got 2.8 pounds. So you get a lot more flesh out of that. Now, think about this from a business angle. If you're trying to produce as much protein, as much meat on these fish as possible, you'll get far more. It'll grow much quicker. And from a business angle, what you need to feed it in terms of getting your profits, it's going to be far more profitable to grow these genetically modified salmon. But here's the question. Is this going to be kosher? Because this salmon, think about it. On the surface, it displays all the simanim. It displays all the signs of a kosher fish. It has fins. It has scales. It's a salmon on steroids almost, this thing, the Frankenfish. But spliced into its genes are from this eel-like creature, which is not kosher. So when I remember seeing this story in 2010, so the question that fascinated me at the time is like, wow, right now it seems all theoretical. I don't know if it'll ever get licensed and it will get approved, but will this thing be kosher when it comes to market? So let's go jump forward. This article I found a couple years ago in 2019. So this is just about almost to the day, almost 3 years ago. GMO, this was in USA Today. Genetically modified organism Frankenfish salmon could be in stores as early as next year as FDA lifts import ban. Look at the name here, Zlati Meyer. I'm wondering if she was Jewish. Zlata is a real Yiddish name. I don't know. Meyer sounds like a Jewish last name. Genetically engineered salmon is swimming your way. U.S. Food and Drug Administration is now allowing this kind of fish whose DNA has been altered to speed up growth and its eggs into the U.S. The announcement means that Aqua Bounty Technologies may import Aqua Advantage salmon eggs to its facilities near Albany, Indiana, where the fish grow faster than traditional Atlantic salmon. Aqua Advantage salmon could hit store shelves by 2020, said the company. It declined to discuss what the cost would be. So it has not hit shelves yet. From what I could tell from doing some research, it's still, for one reason or another, they haven't gotten the business model down pat yet. So this has not yet been marketed, but all the USDA has, US FDA has cleared everything here. So in other words, it's been deemed healthy and it's going to hit the market. It's just a question of when. And the question is, I guess it's going to take them a while to figure out what the price has got to be to make this worth it. But it's going to cost them, they're hoping, less money, and you'll get more fish out of this. So the question's going to come up, is this thing kosher? Again, externally, it exhibits all the signs of a kosher fish. It's got scales, it's got fins. So what's going to be with this? Are we going to say that this thing is kosher when the frankenfish does hit the supermarket? Are we going to see it with an OU on it? Okay, Starkey, whatever the case may be, are we going to see it with a hechsher? So when this came up, I remember looking into this, and I'll tell you, I believe it will be kosher. I don't think it's going to be a problem at all. I think what we're going to look at the end of the day is, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck, right? This thing has scales, it has fins. Internally on the micro, biotic level, it had some genes of eel spliced into it. I don't think that's going to affect things. So I think it's going to be very clear that we're going to just look at what is the finished product. Does it have scales and fins? And this is based on a concept in halacha called zeh v'zeh gorein. If you have this and this causing something, meaning if there are multiple factors that are playing a role in something, then it's okay. Meaning, if it was just an eel, it would be a problem. But since it's a tag team, it's an eel plus a salmon, I think it's going to be fine. Let me show you where this halacha comes up in Shulchan Aruch. Again, as far as I know, this thing's not on the market yet, so the OU and others haven't weighed in on it. But I've seen some remarks from some people at the OU discussing, I don't remember if it was this fish or something very similar. And I think, again, it was reported in New York Times. It wasn't giving a halachic dissertation, but based on the wording and the language they were using, I think this is the principle they're using, is what I'm going to share with you from the Shulchan Aruch. So the Shulchan Aruch, this is interesting. This is in a part that many of us don't study because it's in the laws of Hilchos Avodas Kochavim, the laws of idolatry. And how often does the laws of idolatry come up? It's in Yoredeya. Yoredeya's got all the laws of kashrus, the laws of tzedakah, the laws of avelus. That's all practical stuff. How often does the laws of idol worship show up? But here, this is where you're going to find it. And I think this is what is going to be the key halachic source for deciding on frankenfish. So let's look at this. The Shulchan Aruch writes, Mutter lita tachas ha'ashera yirakos. I am allowed to plant underneath an Asherah tree. I'm allowed to plant vegetables. Asherah trees are trees that the ancient Canaanites worshipped. It's hard for us to wrap our heads around this, but the pagans that lived in the land of Canaan before Yehoshua comes marching in with Bnei Yisrael, they were wanton idolaters. They were into every form of idol worship possible. And one form of idol worship was some type of tree worship. They worshiped these Asherah trees. Very hard for us to know what that was, but they were into that. And the Torah is very clear that when it comes to Avodah Zarah, something which has been used for idol worship, we need to destroy it. We're not allowed to get any hana, any benefit from it. So the Shulchan Aruch says, even though I'm not allowed to get benefit from an Asherah tree, I'm allowed to plant my vegetables. I want to plant my cucumber patch, my tomatoes somewhere. I'm allowed to plant them directly underneath an Asherah tree. Whether it's in the summer, where they need shade. So the Asherah tree is providing shade for my cucumbers and tomatoes. And even if it's in the winter where they didn't really need the shade, it's not benefiting so much. So the Chiddush is, even in the summer, the novel teaching is in the summer where they need shade, I'm allowed to plant them underneath the Asherah tree. Why? Because if you look at it, yes, it is benefiting from the tzel, from the shade of the tree, shuasar, which is really forbidden. However, it's imakarka, but it's more than one factor playing a role in my cucumbers and tomatoes growing. yes, it's getting some benefit from the shade, but it's primarily, or it's a tag team, it's benefiting from the karka, from the ground. She'ena nesers, and the ground was never aser. Garmim liyarakos elu litzmach. There are multiple factors that are playing a role in my vegetables growing. It's not just the shade of the Asherah tree, it's also the ground and the soil. And there's nothing usher about the soil. Whenever you have an item that is being prompted by a combination, it's being propelled by a combination of a davar usher, something which is forbidden, and something which is mutter, permitted. If I ever have that it's being caused by these two factors, one permitted, one usher, hareza mutter, b'chol makom, that will always be mutter. So the principle is, if it's zev zegorem, if you have multiple factors that are playing a role in this item's success, one is usher, one is mutter, then the item remains mutter, as long as it remains permitted, since you can't say it's a total result of the isser, of the prohibited factor. Lefikach, he gives another example. Sada shezavla bezavel. Let's say I had a field and I fertilized it using manure, shalavodas kochavim, manure that somehow or another was tainted by idol worship. How did that happen? Look, some of these pagan cults, they could have used manure in their idol worship techniques. Bizarre stuff went on back then. So let's say I liberate some of that manure from some pagan cult temple that had avodah zarah status, and I say, this is manure, this is good for fertilizing my field. So mutter lizrasa, I'm allowed to plant stuff in that field. Why? Because again, it's zeh. It's the manure and the soil that are allowing my stuff to grow. One more, he says, let's say I had my cow and I needed to feed it something, but I liberated from a pagan temple. I found that they had some beans, they had some porridge that had been used for some idolatrous ceremony. And I said, I'm not going to eat that, but I'll feed it to Bessie the cow. So I fed it to my cow, I fattened up my cow, and now I want to have a barbecue. So I slaughter my cow. So it says, Teachel, I'm allowed to eat my cow, even though my cow is benefited from that. But that's not all it ate. It also had some corn. It also had some hay. It also had some other stuff. It drank water or whatever other stuff. And it also ate some of these beans from avodah zarah. So it's a combination of factors that are making this thing thrive. So all of that is mutter. And anything similar to this would also be okay. So to me, this sounds like this is going to be the fundamental source. This is going to be the precedent source that's going to say that frankenfish, if it does hit the market, and it sounds like it will, why it's going to be okay. Yes, it's got some genes from an eel spliced into it, but it's not an eel. It's got all the external signs of a salmon. It's got scales. It's got fins. It's bigger. It looks like a salmon on steroids. It's definitely a lot bigger, but at the end of the day, it does have the genes of the eel in it, but it's zev gorem. It's a product of multiple factors, not just the eel. It's a product of the salmon. In fact, the majority of the salmon. I think that'll be fine. Anyhow, this is just a fascinating thing to think about as we read the parsha this week. We saw the dinim of kashrus, how they apply to animals, how they apply to fish and to birds. Here's something to think about. All right, I'm going to